feel like I'm really happy. I can kind of show you now. So it's,
Today, I'm going to finish some terrain. Maybe convince you to do the same. Now, 3D prints aren't all that much different from model kits when you're working with it, especially from a terrain perspective. The first step you're going to want to do is cleanup. General good practice is to go over all of your prints, checking for any kind of print scarring, whether it be from a glitch in your printer or more likely from the supports. You see, a lot of times when you end up removing supports from your models, it'll leave some form of scarring, be it pits where it dug out a little bit of material as removed, or little dimples from where the whole support wasn't completely removed. I'm going to go ahead and sand all of the bottoms to these too, giving me a nice surface to glue them onto their bases later. Also, because on some of them, there's some pretty bad warping. So let's address a couple of questions real quick right here. Like, where did all of this terrain come from? And the short answer? Patreon. See, I'm following a couple of Patreon artists to get a lot of models I use for D&D or proxies in different war games. And oftentimes they'll release a matching set of terrain to all of their sets. And so that's where I got all these from. So, undoubtedly as a follow-up, you're probably wondering why it's all printed out here like this. Now, that's a bit of a longer answer that has a story to it. See, I used to do a lot of experimenting when I was 3D printing. I'd try out all different kinds of resins, tuning it in, and just seeing kind of what they can do and what they're good for. Spoiler alert, some resin sucks. So rather than trash an entire bottle of resin that still cost very real money, I decided to use it on something that required a little less quality in the print. All of the terrain files I had. And now, all of this happened probably a little over a year ago. So, all these are going to get based, and these guys are going to be regular scatters, so back into the box. Those will all come out later when everything's on the same page. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to mark each terrain piece, so that way I know what size base it needs to go on. Okay, so, all labeled, and we know what base is going on what, so let's get those bases ready. Now, for sure, some of you find the thought of round bases odd for terrain, but hear me out. Give me a chance to defend my choices. See, Blackmagic Craft is a fantastic content creator and terrain maker. They've been extremely influential and inspiring to me personally when doing any crafting, building, and just being in the hobby in general. Now, recently he's been posting a lot of progress and different builds for their new game, Idols of Torment. And I just think it all looks great, and almost all of the terrain he's done has round bases to it. And well, I liked it. So, I'm doing it too. Anyway, enough defending decisions that don't actually need defending. Let's finish up these bases. Alright. All of our discs cut out for the bases. It's time to glue it down. We're just going to use some tacky glue to get that all done. Okay. So right now, everything that's going to be based is based. We're going to give these guys overnight to dry. And then tomorrow we're going to actually, put some texture on this base and make them look like actual ground cover. So, now what we're going to do is use some modeling magic to fill in any gaps and add a little bit of variety to the texture here. If I'm being totally honest, I'd love to use something like a modeling compound or sculpt malt to use it and make a really nice, fine, earthy texture, but I just moved, and I'm poor. My modeling magic is gone. and bought another one. Okay. So I hate buying things I know I already have. Now, this is particularly frustrating because literally just yesterday I had to go out and buy a couple of washers for this base I was making for this guy. And I know I have them. I literally found them when I woke up the next morning. So guaranteed, I'm gonna find this model magic tomorrow. But I need it now. Oh, this miniature? Seems kind of unfamiliar to some of you. Well, I guess you should go check out my Instagram and see all the kinds of things that are getting posted there. Alright, let's get this done. Okay, well, that worked. I've got a little bit of this model magic all over my bases, gives it a little nice texture and blends in some of those really egregious parts where the prints were curling. So now we're just gonna get some texture on the base. Alright, so to get this done, I'm just gonna use some regular old PVA glue and then a custom mix I use for basing of tile grout, construction sand, and just regular old dirt from outside. So we're gonna get to oh. Well, that worked. Prime time. You know what's more fun than watching paint dry? Watching other people's paint dry. So, why not follow the channel, subscribe, and see all the kind of content I'll be making in the future. Now, after taking these guys outside for a quick spray prime, our first step is going to be to prime again? Now, to answer the question, why is he using a brush-on primer after spraying everything? I do actually have an answer. And it's only partially because this build is very haphazardly planned. So, I went out and got these guys spray primed really quick. So there's just a couple of spots, catches underneath that didn't really get a ton of coverage on, so I just want to get up and done. Also, because of prior experience with this particular primer, I know it doesn't have the best paint adhesion, so I just want to get something over it first, so that way when I actually start throwing paints on here, they don't just slide right off. As for why I used that primer, knowing it's not that great, it's what I had, so just had to get rid of it. Well, I'm gonna be here for a minute, so we can go ahead and check in later. Alright, we got a lot of terrain here, and I don't have forever to paint this. So we're gonna come up with a plan of attack to knock these out. Firstly, all of this painting, we're gonna keep it simple. I mean, it's terrain, it really doesn't have to be a show stealer. Secondly, we're gonna batch all of the same materials at the same time. So that way I'm gonna be using the same paints and same techniques. I don't have time to constantly be switching through brushes and paints. We gotta get this done fast. And thirdly, we're gonna be rocking one fat old brush for this whole process. See, I need a brush that can hold a lot of paint in its belly and something that I really don't have to worry about whether it survives this or not. Alright, let's rock and roll this first step with the largest material taken up by this collection, which is rocks. Now on this one, we're gonna keep it real simple. I'm not even gonna break out the brush on this one. See, what we're gonna do is we're gonna use some torn up sponge to sponge on grays. and we're going to use progressively lighter grays going up, focusing on the higher areas that would end up catching more light. Now, finally, as a large unifying color, we're going to use our lightest gray and do a very light dry brush over the entire surface. And boom! That's like a third of the painting done in basically no time at all. Let's keep cracking. Now, wood is the next material we see most often occurring in this terrain. Now, to keep it quick and moving, we're going to break this down into 2 steps. Step the first, we're going to do a heavy dry brush over all of the wooded areas. Step the first, we're going to do a heavy dry brush over all of the areas that are supposed to be wood. We want to avoid all those deep cracks or anything on there, but cover everything else in our ivory color. Step dos, we're going to come in with a contrast or Army Painter speed paint. Now, choose whatever your preferred flavor of wood is. For me, it's going to be Contrast Paint's Wildwood. Now, I actually came back to that piece and did the rest of them with straight, unthinned Wildwood, because that first one was a little too thin, you know? And it came out looking great. Now, you see that? That's like half of our terrain done. This is going to be a cakewalk. Alright, so after the wood, we don't really have a lot of overarching materials that span through all of the different terrain pieces. So we're going to start getting into a little bit more of the details. We're going to start with all of the bones and skulls because of this giant skull throne here. Now this thing gives me mad Khans of Tarkir vibes, so I'm going to let that inspiration totally carry me through this one. Alright, now first I apply a base coat of a yellow ochre. Okay, now that I've opened the windows and let all those glue fumes out, I'm kind of left wondering why I did that. I have a perfectly good skull and bone recipe I use all of the time. And yeah, we're going to go with that. First, I apply a base coat of a light umber over everything that's going to be bone. Now, normally I would move on to layering the ivory over all of that light umber. But I don't really think it's a good idea here, as well, just terrain. We gotta go fast. So instead, I'll be using a dry brush and using several light layers on it. Probably about 2 or 3 should get you good on any piece. Now we're gonna cover all of them bony bits in some contrast skeleton horde, or your preferred contrast alternative. And hey, if you want to use my regular bone recipe on like miniatures or even a more important piece of terrain, what you can do to bring some more interest back into it is return to that ivory color and then layer up a couple of the highlighted points that would end up catching more light. Now, for all of our plants and greenery here, we're going to keep this super simple. 3 layers of green paint, each brighter than the last and each covering up less area than the last. So now this is where the tutorial part of the video kind of falls off. Really, you can basically paint any terrain you have to a really high standard with the techniques I've already shown you with everything else here. So let's go ahead and just finish off the rest of these models. The only thing we got left is the metallics. And that can't be hard, right? So for our first layer on all of the metallics, we're going to take our Vallejo color aluminum and then we're going to mix it in with a regular dark gray acrylic. This is really going to dull that color down and make it for a nice base coat on all of our metallics. Now, we're going to take our Vallejo color aluminum directly and we're going to add some rough, stipply highlights to all of our metallic areas. Now, if you're anything like me, I think we have the same thoughts about how this is looking right now. It looks like trash. Well, let's see how Past Chappie is handling all of the momentum he's had on this project come to a screeching halt.
Okay, so we're just a little bit off of the metal snafu. I took a break and I ate some food. We're so close. I just want to be done.
So at this point in the project, my well of motivation is running dry, and any momentum I had is all but dead. So I'm looking for anything I can do to technically qualify this project as done and get that little checkbox knocked off. So we're going to paint the bases on these guys real quick. We're going to use a couple of different shades of browns and just slap them all over the base, blending them together. Now this is going to take way too much paint, so we're going to go ahead and switch over to really cheap acrylic. Alright, so here I am, hours before the video gets published, and I'm here with a pile of my own failure. Or is it? Let's circle back to what the point of this video was. Today, I'm going to finish the terrain. Maybe convince you to do the same. I think I'm in a very similar situation to a lot of you watching this video. I work full-time. I go to school. Unfortunately, I just don't have all the time in the world to spend on my hobby, as great as that would be. But I'm willing to bet most of you don't either. So, no, I didn't end up finishing all of my misprint terrain. But I've broken the back of this project. And while the video has a timetable it needs to be released on, you can bet I'm going to keep working on this. And hopefully, you're looking at a project you've shelved a while ago thinking, yeah, I think it's time to get that finished. Now watch as my cat finishes the terrain for me.